For years, Officer Gregory Calloway and Officer Anthony Miller did whatever they wanted. Every traffic stop was a trap. Every complaint disappeared. They ruled through fear, knowing no one could touch them until they harassed the wrong man. A black man walking his German shepherd through a quiet neighborhood. A man they assumed was powerless. Just another face they could intimidate. When he didn't submit, when he questioned their authority, they escalated. Harsh words became threats became violent, and when his dog stepped forward, one of them reached for his gun. Now, Malcolm Hayes, a Delta Force operative with nothing left to lose, is coming for them. The officers thought they understood power, thought their badges made them untouchable, but they have no idea what's coming. Justice will be swift and painful. Before we go any further, comment on where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over the quiet suburban street, its golden light filtering through the trees that lined the neatly paved sidewalks. Rex's paws tapped rhythmically against the concrete, his ears flicking at the distant hum of a lawnmower, the occasional chirp of birds hidden among the branches. His leash hung loosely in Malcolm's grip, the German shepherd moving in perfect sync with his owner, alert but relaxed. It was a beautiful day, one of those rare moments when the world felt still, uncomplicated. Malcolm took a slow breath, inhaling the crisp scent of freshly cut grass, feeling the weight of the day ease just slightly. This walk was part of his routine, a simple pleasure after long weeks spent traveling for work. He had been away longer than usual this time, overseeing security operations overseas. Now that he was back, he wanted nothing more than to enjoy the little things, a quiet walk with Rex, the feeling of the sun on his skin, the comfort of home. Yet, even as he savored the moment, he was aware of the eye. It always happened. A car rolling to a slow stop at a nearby intersection. The slight movement of a curtain in a second-story window. A jogger who hesitated just a little too long before continuing past. Malcolm had spent most of his adult life in high-risk environments where survival depended on reading a situation before it unfolded. Out there, it was about identifying threats, enemy combatants, hidden explosives, unseen dangers waiting in the shadows. Here, in the place that was supposed to be home, it was different. Subtler, less overt, but no less real. He felt it in the way strangers' eyes lingered on him just a second too long, in the way some clutched their purses a little tighter, in the way a man walking his golden retriever had crossed the street last week without ever making eye contact. He had done nothing but exist, and still it was enough to make people uneasy. It was ironic, really. He had spent over a decade in the most elite counterterrorism unit in the world, the U.S. Army's Delta Force. He had operated in places where stepping into the wrong alley meant never stepping out again, where trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had taken down warlords, dismantled terrorist cells, protected people who never even knew they were in danger. And yet, here in his own neighborhood, the place he had paid for with blood, sweat, and sacrifice, he was the one who didn't belong. A car turned the corner ahead, creeping forward at a pace that felt too deliberate. Malcolm glanced toward it, already knowing what he was about to see. The black and white police cruiser. The familiar shape of the police cruiser, the low humming growl in Rex's chest, was so soft that no one else would have heard it. Malcolm gave the leash a small tug. "Easy, boy." His voice was calm, soothing. Rex obeyed instantly, his head tilting toward Malcolm as if reading his expression. The cruiser slowed as it pulled alongside him, matching his pace. Then came the voice. "Afternoon, sir." Stopped walking, he turned toward the vehicle with measured ease. His posture was relaxed, his expression neutral. No tension, no challenge. "Afternoon, officer," he replied, keeping his tone polite. Always polite. The driver, Officer Calloway, leaned against the open window, his expression unreadable, but his eyes assessing, cataloging, searching. His partner, Officer Miller, had already stepped out of the vehicle, his boots crunching against the pavement as he positioned himself just a few steps away, close enough to intimidate, far enough to claim it wasn't intentional. They weren't here for a friendly chat. "You live around here?" Calloway asked, tilting his head slightly. "I wasn't aware walking my dog was suspicious." Calloway smirked. "You'd be surprised what people think is suspicious these days." Miller took a slow step closer, his eyes dropping to Rex, who was still standing calmly but watching the officers with quiet intensity. "That's a big dog," Miller commented, feigning interest. "Yes, sir." "Trained for what?" Malcolm let the questions settle in the air for a moment, still maintaining his relaxed stance. He knew where this was going. Obedience, protection. He's very disciplined. Miller nodded slowly as if weighing the words. Then Calloway shifted the conversation. "Going to need to see some ID. It wasn't a request." Malcolm knew his rights. He could ask why. He could refuse. He could stand his ground. But he also knew exactly what kind of men he was dealing with. "Of course," he said smoothly, already reaching into his jacket. Moving slowly, deliberately, Rex let out a barely audible rumble, shifting slightly closer. Calloway's eyes flicked toward the dog, and Malcolm didn't miss the way his fingers twitched near his belt. "Whoa there," Miller muttered, his voice just a little sharper. "You might want to keep that thing under control." Malcolm's jaw tightened, just slightly, but his voice remained level. "Rex is fine. He's well trained." Calloway chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, we'll see about that." Something about the way he said it made Malcolm's stomach tighten. It was the tone, the unspoken promise of what was coming next. He pulled his wallet out carefully, holding it up. Calloway barely glanced at it before waving his hand dismissively. "Nah, I think we're going to need you to step over here for a second. Just a few questions." Malcolm exhaled slowly. "Carefully. Don't give them an excuse." He gave Rex's leash the lightest tug, signaling the command to stand down. Then he stepped forward, and that was when everything changed. Malcolm stepped forward, moving with deliberate calm, his wallet held out for them to take. Rex's leash remained steady in his grip, his stance unchanged, but the dog's body had tensed just slightly, an imperceptible shift that only Malcolm could feel. He would have noticed he could feel the weight of the officer's scrutiny, the way their eyes tracked his every movement. How Calloway's smirk barely masked the sharp edge of control he was trying to exert over the situation. Miller took the wallet with a lazy sort of arrogance, flipping it open like he expected to find something damning inside. His fingers traced over the identification card, twisting slightly before he turned it toward Calloway. "Well, look at that," Miller mused, shaking his head. "We got ourselves a real-life soldier." Calloway took the wallet from him, glancing at it with an unimpressed expression. "Delta Force, huh?" His voice carried that same casual disdain, as if even Malcolm's service to the country wasn't enough to earn a shred of basic respect. That's supposed to mean something. Malcolm didn't react. He had learned long ago that men like this wanted a reaction, craved it, and fed off it. Any sign of irritation or defiance would only give them an excuse to push harder. So he remained as he was, calm, polite, immovable. "It means I've served," he said, his tone even and measured. "And now I work in security consulting. As I mentioned earlier." Calloway let out a small chuckle, shaking his head before handing the wallet back to Malcolm in a way that forced him to step closer to take it. It was a small thing, but Malcolm recognized it for what it was. A power play. He took his wallet back, tucking it into his jacket without breaking eye contact. "That's so," Calloway drawled, "because what I see is a guy walking around a neighborhood where people don't seem to recognize him. And you know how it is. Folks around here get nervous When they see someone they don't think belongs there. They weren't even bothering with subtlety anymore. Malcolm tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. I do belong. I live here. Calloway folded his arms, stepping just slightly closer. Then you won't mind answering a few more questions, would you? Malcolm remained where he was, neither retreating nor advancing. I believe I already have. Miller scoffed under his breath, adjusting his belt. I don't know, Calloway. Something about his attitude doesn't sit right with me. The guy seems a little tense, don't you think? Calloway smirked. Yeah, almost like he's got something to hide. Malcolm took in a slow breath, centering himself and resisting the natural urge to respond. He had been in more hostile situations than he could count, had faced warlords, insurgents, and men with bombs strapped to their chests, enemies who wanted him dead and had every means to make it happen. Yet in all those years, he had never felt quite this level of restraint tightening around him like a vice, because here, in his own country, in the very place he had fought to protect, he wasn't seen as a man who had served, as a citizen with rights. He was a threat, a problem to be handled, and Rex knew it. The dog had been trained to read situations, to recognize tension, and to detect when his handler was in danger. Right now, though Malcolm remained still, Rex could sense that something was wrong. His ears were up, his gaze locked on the officers, and his body language shifted from relaxed to alert. Calloway noticed. You got that thing under control? He asked, motioning toward Rex with a tilt of his chin. Malcolm tightened his grip just slightly on the leash. He's fine. He's trained. Miller narrowed his eyes. Yeah, trained for what? Malcolm kept his expression neutral. Protection, security. He follows commands. Calloway let out a low whistle, shaking his head. A dog like that, all trained up to attack? Dangerous thing to be walking around with, don't you think? He's not trained to attack, Malcolm corrected, his patience thinning despite himself. He's trained to defend. Calloway's smirk widened. What exactly does he think? You need defending from, huh? The words sat heavy with meaning between them. Malcolm said nothing. Miller exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. I don't know. The Calloway guy's got a big dog and won't answer questions. He seems really on edge. He took another step forward, this time intentionally closing the space between them. I think maybe we need to go ahead and bring him in, just to be safe. Malcolm could feel Rex's tension spiking, the leash pulling just slightly. As the German shepherd adjusted his stance, muscles coiled, prepared. He could sense what was happening and could feel the shift. The moment just before a situation spiraled out of control. You don't need to do that, Malcolm said, his voice carefully measured. I've cooperated. I've shown my ID. There's no cause to detain me. Miller gave an exaggerated shrug. Maybe. But see, I just don't like the way this is going. And I think we need to make sure everything checks out. Calloway tilted his head. I think we're going to need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back. Just for our safety. You understand? Malcolm's jaw clenched ever so slightly, but his voice remained calm. I haven't done anything. Yeah? Calloway smiled, stepping closer. Then you won't mind. It was a test, a deliberate, calculated provocation. And then Miller reached out a hand on Malcolm's wrist, firm and insistent. Rex's snarl cut through the air like a blade. Instantly, both officers' hands went to their weapons. Malcolm moved without thinking. A shift of his arm, a fluid motion redirecting Miller's grip without force, stepping back even as he held Rex's leash firm, grounding the dog before he could move. Whoa, 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 Malcolm said quickly, his voice calm but sharp with authority. He's reacting to your aggression. Stand down. But they weren't listening. Miller had already drawn his gun, his face twisted into something Malcolm had seen before. Fear disguised as control. "Get that dog back," Calloway barked, stepping away, his own hand hovering over his holster. Rex was still in place, but his entire body was taut, his instincts screaming, his eyes locked on the men who now posed a clear and present danger to his handler. Malcolm's pulse slowed, his training kicking in, every single variable flashing through his mind in an instant. This wasn't going to end well. Heart pounded, not in fear, but in frustration, in the suffocating knowledge that there was nothing he could say, no amount of reason that would shift the path they had chosen for this moment. Calloway gestured aggressively at the ground. "Put that mutt down. Make him sit now." Malcolm kept his movements slow, calculated. He turned his head just slightly, giving a quiet, controlled command. "Rex, down!" Immediately, Rex lowered himself to the ground, his body stiff but obedient, his ears flicking back slightly, sensing the forced nature of the order. Miller scoffed, shaking his head. "Oh, now you want to listen?" Calloway wasn't satisfied. His hand dropped lower toward his holster. "Leash, shorten it. Make sure he can't move." Malcolm's jaw clenched, but he obeyed, gripping the leash closer, keeping Rex locked in place, his breathing steady, his focus unwavering. Calloway exchanged a glance with Miller. Something silent passed between them, something unspoken but heavy. An agreement, a decision. Miller exhaled slowly, rolling his shoulders like he was shaking out tension. "We're done playing around. Turn around, hands behind your back." Malcolm stiffened. His voice dropped to something lower, quieter, but still controlled. "I've done nothing wrong." Calloway's smirk returned. "Yeah, and yet here we are." Malcolm didn't move. He knew what would happen if he turned around. The moment he gave them his back, he'd be in cuffs, shoved against the pavement, and whatever excuse they wanted to use afterward would be built off the fact that he resisted, even though he hadn't. "Turn around," Miller ordered again, taking a step forward. Rex let out a deep, rolling growl. Both officers' hands shot to their guns. "Control your damn dog," Miller shouted. Malcolm's voice snapped, sharp and authoritative. "He is controlled." "Not good enough." Calloway yelled back, his fingers tightening on his weapon. Malcolm felt the shift, the moment before the moment. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. The air seemed to still. The heat of the sun suddenly distant. The world shrinking to just this space, this street, these men who had never once intended to let him walk away from this moment, with his dignity intact. Miller moved first. His hand jerked toward his gun. Rex reacted before Malcolm could even process the movement. A defensive instinct, a split-second reaction, the very thing the officers had been waiting for. A single bark, sharp and quick, a warning. Then the shift of muscle as Rex tensed. Malcolm barely had time to process the movement before it. The gunshot rang out, splitting through the air like a crack of thunder. The leash jerked in Malcolm's hand, and then Rex stumbled. The world slowed as the sound of blood roared in Mal's ears, drowning out everything else. The officers' shouts, the distant noise of a car engine, the voices of unseen neighbors who had been watching from the safety of their windows. All he saw was Rex's body jerking back, the shock in his dark brown eyes, the way his legs faltered beneath him as his body gave way. No, Malcolm's voice didn't even sound like his own. His knees hit the pavement before he even realized he had moved. Rex collapsed against him, his weight heavy, too heavy, and Malcolm's hands were suddenly slick with warmth, with life slipping away far too fast. A low, pained whimper escaped from Rex's throat, his breathing shallow and uneven. Miller still had his gun raised. his face a twisted mask of self-satisfaction and mock surprise. Calloway simply shook his head, exhaling through his nose. Told you he was a liability. Malcolm barely heard them. Everything inside him went still. Malcolm barely registered the voices around him, barely processed the shift in movement, the shuffle of boots against pavement, the crackle of a distant radio transmission. His entire world had shrunk to the warm, crumpling weight in his arms, to the sharp, ragged breaths tearing through Rex's throat, to the way his dog, his companion, his brother in arms, his protector, was struggling against the inevitable, refusing to let go even as his body failed him. "Stay with me," Malcolm whispered, his voice raw and hoarse, breaking on the edges. His hands pressed desperately against the wound, warm blood seeping between his fingers, pooling onto the pavement, staining his clothes and skin, the world around him turning red as his vision blurred with something hotter, darker, more consuming than anything he had ever felt before. "I got you, boy. Stay with me, please." Rex's eyes were still on him, still alert, still searching, his face as if waiting for a command, waiting for direction. But there was no battlefield, no mission, no threat to eliminate, just pain, just confusion, just the deep unspoken bond between them unraveling too fast for Malcolm to stop it. He could feel the tremors racking through Rex's body, the rapid, panicked rise and fall of his chest, the small, strangled sounds escaping from his throat as if he wanted to respond, to tell Malcolm he was still fighting, that he would always fight, but the strength was fading, slipping like sand through Malcolm's grasp, like something he had no power to hold on to. You're okay, Malcolm muttered, his hands shaking as he stroked Rex's head, his fingers slipping over the damp fur, cradling his dog's face as if he could keep him grounded. Keep him here. You're strong, buddy. Just hold on. Just, damn it, Rex, don't you quit on me. The officers were talking. He could hear them, but they didn't matter. Their voices were nothing but distant, meaningless noise, like the buzzing of insects, irrelevant and hollow, against the sound of Rex's slowing breaths, against the pulse of rage rising in Malcolm's chest like a tidal wave, violent and uncontainable. Then Rex let out a final shallow exhale, and his body went still. Something inside Malcolm snapped. He lifted his head, eyes burning. Blood smeared across his hands, his forearms, his clothes, his breathing hitched, then turned to something deeper, rougher, jagged with fury. His entire body trembled, but it wasn't with grief. It was something else, something hotter, something breaking loose from the deepest part of him, something primal, something that had been chained down for too damn long. You! His voice was a growl, a threat, an unfiltered burst of hatred coiling around his words, barely contained, barely human. He surged upward, pushing away from Rex's still body, his hands clenching into fists, his entire stance shifting, rigid, braced, ready. He killed him. Miller flinched, but Calloway just sneered, shaking his head like he was dismissing a child's tantrum. "That's on you, big guy. You should have controlled your damn dog." The world turned red. Malcolm lunged, not thinking, not planning, just moving, just acting, just giving in to the raw, vicious, undeniable fury tearing through every inch of him. He wanted to feel his fists sink into flesh, wanted to break something, wanted to tear them apart the way they had just torn his world apart. The sharp, brutal snap of electricity slammed into his spine, his entire body seized, muscles locking, nerves igniting in blinding, unbearable pain as the taser voltage ripped through him, stealing his breath, stealing his strength, sending him crashing back to the ground, his body convulsed, pain exploding through every nerve, his vision white-hot with agony, his jaw locking as the current overpowered every thought, every instinct, leaving him helpless, thrashing against the pavement, unable to move, unable to do anything but feel. And then they were on him, boots pressing against his arms, against his back, pistols leveled at his head, voices shouting, demanding, barking orders like he was some wild animal they needed to put down. "Stay down. Don't you move. Hands behind your back now." Malcolm gasped, choking on his own breath, rage and grief crashing into his chest like a wrecking ball. Every part of him screaming to fight back, to break free, to do something, anything, but submit. But they had guns. They had already killed Rex, and if he moved again, if he gave them even the slightest excuse, they would do the same to him. His body trembled, his muscles still twitching from the taser, but he forced his arms behind his back, his fists clenching so tightly his nails dug into his own palms, hard enough to draw blood, the weight of a knee pressed between his shoulder blades, grinding him down, suffocating, humiliating. "Yeah, that's right," Calloway muttered, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "That's where you belong." Malcolm let out a raw, guttural scream. It wasn't a sound of pain, it was rage, pure and undiluted, thick with grief, with helplessness, with a fury so deep it felt like it would burn him alive. "You killed him," he roared, his voice cracking, breaking, shattering under the weight of everything that was spiraling out of control. "You murdered him." His voice was hoarse, but he kept yelling, kept screaming as if he could force the world to listen, as if he could undo what had just been done through sheer force of will. But no one listened. Calloway yanked him up by his arms, the metal of the cuffs biting into his wrists, his grip rough, punishing. Miller holstered his weapon, watching with something between amusement and indifference as Malcolm was dragged toward the squad car, his body still trembling with unspent rage, with grief too big to contain. He fought against it, against the hands shoving him forward, against the injustice burning like fire in his throat, against the unbearable reality that Rex was gone, that his best friend had just died in his arms, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. But the metal door slammed shut behind him, and he was trapped, alone. The sound of his own ragged, furious breathing was the only thing left. And then slowly something else settled in. Something colder, something sharper, something that felt like steel locking into place. They thought this was over. They thought they had won. But Malcolm wasn't just some man on a walk with his dog. He was in the Delta Force, and, one way or another, he was going to burn their world to the ground. The cold steel of the handcuffs dug into Malcolm's wrists, biting deeper with every shift of the vehicle as it rumbled down the road, its sirens silent, its passengers indifferent to the man shackled in the back. His chest still heaved, his breath uneven, his pulse a war drum hammering against his ribs, his entire body a raw, frayed nerve that hadn't stopped, vibrating since the moment that gunshot had shattered the world. His fingers twitched against the unforgiving metal, muscles still spasming from the lingering effects of the taser, the aftershocks of forced compliance still pulsing through his veins. His jaw ached from how tightly he had been clenching his teeth, his throat raw from the screams they ignored, from the pure, undiluted rage that had poured from his soul and yet had done nothing. Nothing to change the fact that Rex was gone. He could still feel the weight of him, still see those dark eyes filled with loyalty, filled with trust, looking at him in those final moments, waiting for a command, waiting for him to fix it, to protect him, to stop the inevitable from happening. He had never felt so powerless. The cruiser jerked to a stop. The doors swung open. Calloway's hand wrapped around his arm like he was dragging a corpse from a ditch, yanking him forward with a force that sent a jolt of pain shooting through his shoulders. The moment his boots hit the ground, Malcolm forced his body to steady itself, forced the tremor in his limbs to vanish, forced himself to bury the raw, burning storm still clawing at his insides. Not here, not now. They wanted a reaction. They had gotten one when Rex fell. They wouldn't get another. Miller smirked as he stepped out, adjusting his belt with casual arrogance, the kind of swagger that came from knowing he could take a life in broad daylight and suffer no consequences. "Welcome to your new home for the night," he drawled, giving Malcolm's shoulder a hard shove toward the station doors. "Try not to get too comfortable." Malcolm didn't respond. He kept his posture straight, his eyes forward, his mind reeling, calculating, searching for a way through the fog of rage that had settled in his chest like a dying fire, still smoldering, waiting to ignite. The booking process was a blur of cold fingers snapping off his cuffs, ink pressed against his skin, fluorescent lights humming above, him as the weight of everything settled in his bones. His mug shot was taken with Rex's blood still on his clothes, on his hands. The evidence of his loss turned into nothing more than another box. Checked on a form that meant nothing, they led him to a holding cell, a small, stale room that smelled of sweat and old regret, its walls